My name is Jake Miller. I was 14 years old when my family took that trip to Hollow Creek in the summer of 1983. I still have nightmares about it. Even now, all these years later, I wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I can hear them howling in the distance. It was supposed to be a family vacation. Dad had bought this huge RV, a 1982 Fleetwood Pace Arrow, shiny and new. He kept talking about how we were going to reconnect as a family and make memories that would last a lifetime. Looking back, I think he knew something was wrong with Mom. Maybe that's why he was trying so hard. My brother Tyler was 17 and hated everything about the trip from the start. "This is so lame," he'd say, rolling his eyes whenever Dad pointed out something through the RV windows. "I could be hanging out with my friends right now." Tyler had this leather jacket he wore everywhere, even when it was too hot. He thought it made him look cool. Mom was quiet during most of the drive. She kept looking out the window with this sad smile, like she was trying to memorize everything. Sometimes I'd catch her taking these little white pills when she thought nobody was watching. When I asked her about them, she'd just say they were for headaches. Dad drove with both hands gripping the wheel, talking too loud and laughing too much. He worked all the time at his accounting firm, and this was the first vacation he'd taken in 3 years. He kept saying things like, "Isn't this great, guys? Just the open road and the Miller family." I was the only one who seemed excited about the trip. I had this feeling about it, not a bad feeling. Not yet, just a feeling that something important was going to happen. I've always had these feelings. Mom calls them my little premonitions, like when I knew Grandpa was going to die 3 days before the heart attack, or when I told my teacher not to drive home during the storm, and later we found out there was a huge accident on her route. We were heading to the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. Dad had found this place called Hollow Creek Campground in some outdoors magazine. "It's supposed to be beautiful," he kept saying. "Real unspoiled nature." We stopped for gas about 20 miles from the campground. This old gas station looked like something from another time, rusty pumps and a wooden building with peeling paint. That's where we met Elmer Guthrie. He had one eye covered with a patch, and his other eye was this pale blue that seemed to look right through you. His hands were stained with grease as he filled up our RV. "Hollow Creek, huh?" he said when Dad mentioned where we were headed. "Not many folks go there these days. The magazine said it's a hidden gem." Dad replied, sounding proud of himself for finding it. Elmer just stared at him for a moment. "Those with secrets are taken first," he said quietly. Mom laughed nervously. "What does that mean?" But Elmer just shrugged and went back to pumping gas. Before we left, he came up to me while the others were in the store buying snacks. "You got the sight, don't you, boy?" he asked, his one eye narrowing. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out this weird little thing. Looked like a small pouch made of leather with strange symbols stitched into it. "Keep this with you," he said, pressing it into my hand. "Don't take it off no matter what you hear or see." I slipped it into my pocket just as my family came back. As we drove away, I looked back and saw Elmer watching us, his face grim. The road to Hollow Creek got narrower and bumpier as we went. Trees grew thicker on both sides until they formed a kind of tunnel. The sunlight came through in patches, making weird patterns on the road. "This is creepy," Tyler muttered, finally looking up from his Walkman. "It's atmospheric," Dad corrected him with forced cheerfulness. When we finally arrived at the campground, it was almost sunset. The place was empty except for one other RV parked on the far side, a blue and white one that looked a bit older than ours. "That must be the Prescotts," Dad said, checking a piece of paper. "The ranger station guy said there'd be one other family here this week." The campground sat in a valley surrounded by strange rock formations. There was something odd about the place, the way sounds seemed to carry. I could hear water running from the creek, but it sounded louder than it should have, almost like it was being amplified. As Dad parked our RV in the designated spot, I noticed something else strange. There were these perfect circles in the forest where nothing grew, just bare dirt surrounded by thick trees. I counted 5 of them visible from where we stood. "Can we go meet the other family?" I asked, curious about the only other people in this isolated place. "Let's get settled first," Mom said, her voice sounding tired. can be social tomorrow. That night, Dad grilled burgers outside the RV, while Mom set up the little folding table. Tyler sat on a rock nearby, still listening to his music and pretending we didn't exist. I wandered around our campsite, staying within sight but exploring. The creek that gave the place its name was about 50 yards from our RV. The water was clear but strangely dark, like it was much deeper than it appeared. As I stood there watching it, I got that feeling again. A cold sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned around quickly, scanning the tree line. For just a second, I thought I saw something move between the trees. Something large and dark that didn't move like a person. But it was gone so fast, I couldn't be sure. "Jake, dinner," Mom called, and I ran back to the RV, trying to shake off the weird feeling. As we ate dinner outside, the sun disappeared completely, and darkness fell over Hollow Creek. There were no lights except for our lantern and a distant glow from the Prescott's RV. The stars came out, more than I'd ever seen before. "See? Isn't this better than sitting at home playing those video games?" Dad asked, looking happier than he had in months. Even Tyler seemed to relax a little as the night went on. We roasted marshmallows and Dad told some of his corny jokes. Mom laughed at all of them. Even though we'd heard them 100 times before, it was almost normal. Almost perfect. Then we heard the howling. It started as a single long note, not quite like a wolf, higher and somehow more human. Then another joined in, and another, until it sounded like a whole pack was calling out there in the darkness. "Wolves?" Mom asked, moving closer to Dad. "Coyotes, probably," Dad said, but he didn't sound convinced. "They sound different in the mountains." Tyler, trying to act tough, said, "Whatever they are, they're miles away." But I knew they weren't. I could feel them, close by, watching us from the darkness. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt Elmer's charm, suddenly very glad I had it. As we headed into the RV for the night, I looked back at the forest one more time. In the darkness between the trees, I saw them eyes reflecting our lantern light, several pairs. Too high off the ground to be normal animals. I didn't say anything. Who would believe me? That night, as my family slept in the RV, I lay awake listening. The howling had stopped, but something else had taken its place. The sound of heavy things moving around our campsite, circling the RV, and occasionally, a strange clicking noise, like long claws tapping on metal. None of us knew it then, but that first night at Hollow Creek was the beginning of the end for the Miller family, and the things that lived in those woods, they were already hunting us. I woke up the next morning, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My dreams had been filled with running, endless running through dark woods while something chased me. From the tired looks on everyone's faces at breakfast, I wasn't the only one who'd had bad dreams. "I dreamt I was lost in the forest," Mom said quietly as she poured cereal into bowls. "I kept calling for you all, but no one could hear me." Tyler, his eyes red and puffy, just mumbled, "Yeah, weird dreams," and didn't say more. Dad tried to keep things upbeat. "Must be the mountain air. Makes for vivid dreams." But even he looked shaken. Later, when Mom wasn't listening, he whispered to me, "I dreamt something was hunting us." Crazy, right? After breakfast, I went outside while everyone was still getting ready for the day. That's when I saw them, long, deep scratches running down the side of our RV. 4 parallel lines, like something with huge claws had dragged its hand along the metal. "Dad," I called, my voice shaking. "Dad, come look at this." He came rushing out, still pulling on his shirt. When he saw the marks, his face went pale. "What did that?" I asked. Dad ran his fingers over the scratches. "Must be a bear," he said after a moment. "Probably curious about the RV. Good thing we were inside." But the scratches were at least 7 feet off the ground. What kind of bear stands that tall? "Should we leave?" I asked hopefully. "Leave? Over some scratches?" Dad forced a laugh. "No way, buddy. We paid for a week here, and we're going to enjoy it. I'll mention it to the ranger when I see him." Mom came out, and Dad quickly steered her away from the scratches. I could tell he didn't want to worry her. While they were planning our day, I walked around the RV and found something even more disturbing: tracks in the dirt that circled our entire campsite. They weren't bear tracks. They looked almost like dog prints, but huge, bigger than my hand, and the pattern was all wrong. Whatever made them had walked on 2 legs, not 4. I followed the tracks to the edge of the woods and then stopped. Something told me not to go any further alone. As I stood there, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of the creek in the distance. "Hey, want to check out the other family?" Tyler appeared beside me, seeming bored enough to actually want my company. "The Prescotts?" I asked, glad for the distraction. "Yeah, let's go." We walked across the campground to where their RV was parked. It was a sunny morning, but somehow the air felt colder as we approached. Their campsite looked wrong. The chairs were knocked over. A cooler lay on its side, contents spilled out. The door of their RV was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Hello?" Tyler called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. We looked at each other, then slowly approached the RV. Tyler went up the steps first and peered inside. "It's empty," he said, sounding confused. "Holder, all their stuff is still here. Phones, wallets, everything." I joined him at the door. The inside of the RV looked like people had left in a hurry. Blankets thrown aside, a half-eaten meal on the table, a child's teddy bear on the floor. "Maybe they went hiking?" I suggested, not believing it myself. Tyler shook his head and left the door open, left everything behind. We backed away from the RV, both feeling uneasy. "We should tell Dad," I said. Tyler nodded. "Yeah, this is weird." On our way back, Tyler suddenly stopped and pointed to the edge of the forest. "What's that?" About 20 yards into the trees, something red caught the sunlight. We moved closer, cautiously. It was a mark on a tree, a symbol painted in what looked horribly like dried blood, a circle with a line through it. "Let's keep going," I whispered, tugging at Tyler's sleeve. But he was already moving deeper into the woods. "There's another one," he said, pointing to a different tree with a similar mark. I followed reluctantly. The trees had more symbols, some circles, some that looked like stick figures, others just strange lines and curves, all painted in the same rusty red substance. "Tyler, we need to go back," I said, that cold feeling returning to my neck. "In a minute," he muttered, taking pictures with the camera Dad had given him for the trip. "This is actually interesting." That's when we heard it. A low growl coming from deeper in the forest. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded angry. Tyler froze. "What was that?" "I don't know, but we're leaving now." I grabbed his arm and pulled. This time he didn't resist. We hurried back toward the campground, both feeling like something was following us. Just before we reached the clearing, I looked back. Through the trees, I saw a shape moving tall and dark, keeping pace with us, but staying just out of clear sight. When we got back to our RV, Mom was sitting outside, her face pale and drawn. She had a bottle of pills in her hand, which she quickly stuffed into her pocket when she saw us. "Where have you two been?" she asked, her voice strained. "Just exploring," Tyler said, not mentioning the abandoned RV or the symbols. I was about to tell her when Dad came around the corner of our RV, looking worried. "The radio's not working," he said, "and I can't get any signal on my cell phone out here." "Did you see the ranger?" I asked. Dad shook his head. Ranger station was empty. Sign said he'd be back this afternoon. I wanted to tell them everything. The tracks, the Prescotts, the symbols in the woods, but something stopped me. Mom already looked sick, and Dad was trying so hard to make this trip work. Instead, I just asked, "Can we go swimming in the creek?" Dad seemed relieved by the normal question. "Great idea, let's all go cool off." The creek was beautiful in the daylight, clear water flowing over smooth rocks. For a little while as we splashed around in the cold water, things felt almost normal. Dad laughed as he tried to catch fish with his hands. Tyler actually smiled a few times. Mom sat on the bank watching us, and though she didn't join in, she seemed peaceful. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few minutes, I'd scan the tree line, Sure, I'd see those eyes again. The charm Elmer had given me was in my shorts pocket, and I kept touching it for reassurance. As the afternoon wore on, Mom's headaches started getting worse. She kept rubbing her temples and taking those pills when she thought no one was looking. I think I'll go lie down for a bit, she finally said, heading back toward the RV. Dad watched her go with a worried expression. You boys stay where I can see you, he said, before following her. Once they were gone, Tyler turned to me. We need to check out those woods again. Are you crazy? I whispered. Livy. After what we heard, don't be such a baby, he said. Don't you want to know what's going on? The missing family? Those weird symbols? I did want to know, but I was also scared. Still, I didn't want Tyler going alone, so I nodded reluctantly. We'll just go a little way in, he promised. If we hear anything weird, we'll come straight back. We waited until we saw Dad sitting with Mom through the RV window, then slipped into the woods. The afternoon sun was starting to sink, casting long shadows between the trees. The forest seemed even quieter than before. Tyler led the way, following the marked trees deeper into the woods. The symbols got stranger the further we went, more complex, with weird shapes that made my eyes hurt to look at them. What do you think they mean? I whispered. Tyler shook his head. No idea. Some kind of cult thing, maybe. We came to a small clearing, one of those perfect circles where nothing grew. The ground was bare dirt, hard packed, like it had been deliberately cleared. In the center was a pile of bones. Are those animal bones? I asked, not wanting to get closer. Tyler knelt down to look. Some of them, yeah, but these, he pointed to larger bones. These look human. My stomach turned. We need to tell Dad. We need to leave this place. Tyler nodded, finally looking scared. Yeah, let's go. As we turned to head back, a howl cut through the silence, the same eerie, not quite wolf sound from the night before. But this time it was much closer. Run, Tyler said, and we did. We crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about being quiet. The howling continued, joined by others, seeming to come from all around us. I could hear something moving through the trees, keeping pace with us. We burst out of the forest into the campground, gasping for breath. The sun was setting now, painting everything in red light. Dad was outside the RV, looking for us. Where have you been? He demanded. Your mother's worried sick. Dad, Tyler panted. There's something in the woods. We found bones, human bones, and the Prescotts are gone. Just disappeared. Dad's face darkened. What are you talking about? What bones? In a clearing in the woods, I added. And there are these weird symbols painted on the trees in blood. Blood. Dad looked between us. Are you two making this up? No, we both shouted. Dad ran a hand through his hair. Look, I know this trip isn't what you expected, but making up scary stories isn't helping. We're not making it up. Tyler insisted. Go look at the Prescott's RV if you don't believe us. Dad sighed. Fine, show me. We led him across the campground to where the blue and white RV was parked. But when we got there, Dad stopped short. What Prescott's? He asked. What RV? Tyler and I stared in disbelief. The campsite was empty. No RV, no scattered belongings, no sign anyone had ever been there. But it was right here, Tyler said, his voice shaking. This morning, we were inside it. Dad looked at us with concern. Boys, there's no one else staying at this campground. The ranger told me we're the only ones here this week. I felt sick. Dad, I swear, enough. He cut me off. It's getting dark. Let's get back to our RV and have dinner. You two have had enough explorings for one day. As we walked back, I glanced at Tyler. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He believed me. He'd seen it too. That night, as we sat in the RV eating the spaghetti Mom had made, no one talked much. Mom's headaches were worse, and she kept looking out the windows like she expected to see something there. Dad tried to start a card game, but no one was interested. After dinner, I went to the bathroom and found Tyler there, looking under the sink. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for Mom's pills," he whispered. "I want to know what she's taking." "That's her private stuff," I said, but I was curious too. Tyler pulled out a prescription bottle and read the label. His face went white. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" "It's cancer medication," he said, his voice breaking. "Strong stuff. For terminal cases." The word hit me like a punch. Terminal. Mom was dying, and she hadn't told us. Before we could say anything else, the RV rocked suddenly, like something heavy had leaned against it. Then came the scratching sound. Claws on metal, moving along the side of the vehicle. Dad jumped up from the table. What the hell was that? The scratching continued, moving around to the back of the RV. Then came a tapping on the window. Tap, tap, like someone wanting to be let in. We all froze, staring at the window. For a moment, I thought I saw a face there. Not human, but not quite animal either. A long snout, pointed ears, eyes that glowed in the darkness. Then it was gone. "Probably just a branch," Dad said, but his voice trembled. But there was no wind. The night outside was perfectly still. That's when Mom gasped, pointing to the floor. Water was seeping in under the door. Not much, just a thin line of moisture. Dad went to check it out and came back looking grim. "Someone's cut the water line," he said quietly. "And the brake line too. And there's a leak in the fuel tank." "Someone sabotaged us?" Tyler asked. Dad nodded slowly. "Looks that way. We need to leave," Mom said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Now, Robert, we need to get the boys out of here." Dad hesitated. "We can't drive with cut brake lines, and we don't have enough fuel to make it back to town. I'll have to try to fix it in the morning." "And what do we do tonight?" she asked. Dad went to his suitcase and pulled out something none of us knew he had, a handgun. "Tonight," he said, checking that it was loaded, "we stay inside, keep the doors locked, and take turns keeping watch." Outside, the howling started again, closer than ever, and mixed with the howls was something that sounded horribly like laughter. None of us slept much that night. Dad took the first watch, sitting by the window with his gun. Mom tried to get Tyler and me to sleep in the back bedroom, but we refused to leave her side. We all huddled in the main part of the RV, jumping at every sound from outside. The howling continued on and off all night. Sometimes it sounded far away, then suddenly it would be right outside the RV, like they were playing with us. The scratching came and went too, those long claws dragging across the metal, testing for a way in. Around 3 a.m., when Tyler was supposed to be on watch but had dozed off, I heard a new sound, a soft whispering right outside the window near my head. It wasn't in any language I knew, but somehow I could almost understand it. It was calling to me, telling me to open the door and come outside. I found myself standing up, moving toward the door without meaning to. My hand reached for the lock. "Jake," Mom whispered sharply. "What are you doing?" Her voice broke whatever spell I was under. I stumbled back, shaking my head to clear it. "I don't know," I said. "I thought I heard someone calling me." Mom pulled me back to the couch and held me close. "Don't listen to anything out there," she said, her voice trembling, "no matter what it sounds like." When morning finally came, the noises stopped. Dad, who looked like he hadn't slept at all, went outside to check the damage to the RV. Tyler and I followed, while Mom stayed inside, too weak to join us. The RV looked even worse in daylight. Deep scratches covered all sides, some so deep they'd nearly cut through the metal. The water line and brake line had been cleanly cut, and there was a small hole punched in the fuel tank. "Could an animal do this?" Tyler asked, looking around nervously. Dad shook his head. "No animal carries a knife or knows to cut brake lines." He knelt down to examine the tracks around the RV, the same two-legged dog prints I'd seen before, but now there were dozens of them. "I'm going to look for the ranger," Dad said, checking his watch. "He should be at the station by now. You boys stay with your mother. Don't leave the RV for any reason." "Dad, don't go alone," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. He gave me a reassuring smile and ruffled my hair. "I'll be fine, buddy. It's daylight, and the ranger station is just down the road." I'll be back before you know it." He tucked the gun into his belt, covered it with his jacket, and headed off down the dirt road that led to the ranger station. We watched until he disappeared around a bend. Back inside the RV, Mom was sitting at the table with her pills and a glass of water. She looked up when we came in, trying to smile but not quite managing it. "Where's your father?" she asked. "Gone to find the ranger," Tyler said, sitting across from her. "Mom, we know about the cancer." Her face fell. She looked between us, then sighed deeply. "I wanted to tell you after the trip," she said quietly. "I didn't want to ruin our last family vacation." "Last?" I repeated, my voice cracking. She reached out and took my hand. "The doctors say I have a few months. That's why your father planned this trip. He wanted us to have some good memories together before." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Tyler got up suddenly and went to the back of the RV, slamming the bedroom door behind him. I just sat there, holding Mom's hand, trying to process that my mother was dying. "Is that why we're seeing things?" I asked after a while. "Because we're upset about you?" Mom frowned. "What things, Jake?" I told her everything. The tracks, the missing Prescott family, the symbols in the woods, the bones. I even showed her Elmer's charm, which I'd kept in my pocket. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned. When I finished, she said, "I've been seeing things too. Shadows at the edge of the forest, faces in the windows at night." "You believe me?" I asked, surprised. "Of course I do," she said. "You've always had a sense about things, Jake, like your grandmother did." Before we could talk more, Tyler came back from the bedroom. "Dad's been gone too long," he said, looking out the window. "It shouldn't take an hour to walk to the ranger station and back." Mom checked her watch and frowned. "You're right. Maybe he's fixing the RV with the ranger," but I could tell she was worried too. The sun was high in the sky now. It had to be close to noon. "I'm going to look for him," Tyler announced, grabbing his jacket. "No," Mom and I both said at the same time. "We need to stay together," Mom insisted. Tyler hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but if he's not back in another hour, I'm going." We waited, watching the clock tick by painfully slow. 1 hour turned into 2. The sun began its downward arc. Still no sign of Dad. "That's it," Tyler said, heading for the door. "I'm finding him." This time Mom didn't try to stop him. "Be careful," she said. "Take this." She handed him Dad's old hunting knife from the kitchen drawer. "I'm coming too," I said, standing up. Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but just nodded. "Stay together," she said, "and come straight back if you see anything strange." We promised and headed out, following the dirt road toward the ranger station. The woods seemed different in the afternoon light, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. I kept the charm clutched in my hand as we walked. About halfway to the ranger station, Tyler stopped suddenly. "Look," he said, pointing to the side of the road. There, lying in the dirt, was Dad's flashlight. The lens was cracked and the metal was dented, and smeared across it was something dark red. Blood. Tyler picked it up, his hand shaking. "Dad," he called out. "Dad, where are you?" His voice echoed through the trees, but there was no answer. "We should go back," I said, that cold feeling creeping up my neck again. "Get Mom. Try to fix the RV enough to get out of here." Tyler nodded, his face pale. Yeah, let's go." We turned back toward the campground, walking faster now. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the road. Neither of us spoke, but I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. Dad wasn't coming back. As we rounded the last bend before the campground, we saw a police car parked next to our RV. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform was talking to Mom outside. "Thank God," Tyler muttered, breaking into a run. I followed close behind. "Boys," Mom called when she saw us. "This is Sheriff Donovan. He's here about your father." The sheriff turned to look at us. He was a big man with a weathered face and cold eyes. Something about him made me uneasy right away. "You must be Tyler and Jake," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "Your mother tells me your father went missing this morning." We found his flashlight, Tyler said, holding it out. There's blood on it. The sheriff took it, examining it casually. Could be blood, could be rust. Hard to tell. It's blood, I said firmly. And there are things in the woods. They've been circling our RV at night, scratching at the walls. Sheriff Donovan's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at me. Things. What kind of things, son? Before I could answer, I noticed something hanging around the sheriff's neck, a leather cord with a small pouch attached to it, just visible at his collar. It looked exactly like the charm Elmer had given me. The sheriff saw me staring and tucked the pouch back under his shirt. Probably just coyotes, he said, turning back to Mom. They get curious about campers sometimes. These weren't coyotes, Tyler insisted. And what about the Prescotts? The family that disappeared, Prescotts? The sheriff frowned. There's no family by that name registered at this campground. You folks are the only ones here this week. That's what the ranger said too, Mom added, looking confused. Speaking of the ranger, Tyler said, did our dad make it to the station? Sheriff Donovan shook his head. No one's seen your father. But folks do go missing in these woods every few years. Usually they wander off the trails, get turned around. Usually, I repeated. How many people have gone missing here? The sheriff shrugged. Can't rightly say. Not my jurisdiction technically. I'm just here because your mother managed to get a call out on the emergency radio in the ranger station. Something wasn't adding up. If Mom had gone to the ranger station to call for help, she would have been looking for Dad along the way. She would have found the flashlight. I looked at Mom, who avoided my eyes. Something was wrong. We need to leave, Tyler said firmly. Our RV is sabotaged. Can you help us get out of here? Of course, the sheriff said smoothly. But it's getting dark now. Not safe to travel these mountain roads at night. I'll come back in the morning with a tow truck. In the meantime, I'll have a look around for your father. None of us liked the idea of spending another night here, but we didn't seem to have a choice. The sheriff walked around our RV, examining the damage with a little too much interest. Strange, he muttered, running his fingers along the claw marks. Never seen anything quite like this. Sheriff, Mom said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. What's really going on in these woods? He turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just the usual forest creatures, ma'am. Nothing to worry about. But as he said it, his hand went to the charm around his neck, touching it like it was a nervous habit. After the sheriff left, promising to return in the morning, we went back inside the RV and locked the doors. The sun was setting now, painting the sky blood red. Mom, I said once we were alone. How did you call the sheriff? You didn't leave the RV. She looked startled by the question. I used the radio in the RV, she said after a moment. The radio that Dad said wasn't working, Tyler asked, his voice hard. Mom sat down heavily at the table. I don't remember, she said, rubbing her temples. My head hurts so badly. I can't think straight. Tyler and I exchanged worried glances. Mom's illness seemed to be getting worse, and now she was confused. As darkness fell, the noises outside started again. The howling, the scratching. But tonight there was something new. Occasionally we'd hear a tapping at the windows, and when we looked, there would be faces peering in, not quite human, not quite animal. Dog-like snouts, pointed ears, but with eyes that looked disturbingly intelligent. They're testing the windows, Tyler whispered, watching as one of the creatures tapped at the glass with what looked like a clawed hand, looking for a way in. Mom was lying on the couch now, too weak to move much. Her breathing was shallow, and she kept muttering things that didn't make sense. Around midnight, she suddenly sat up, her eyes wide. Robert, she called out. Robert, is that you? Tyler and I looked where she was staring at the bedroom door, which was closed. There was nothing there. Mom, Dad's not here, Tyler said gently, sitting beside her. But she kept staring at the door. He's calling me, she whispered. He says he's found something important in the woods. He wants me to come see. A chill ran down my spine. Mom, that's not Dad, I said urgently. Don't listen to it. She turned to me, her eyes unfocused. but it sounds just like him, Jake. Outside, the howling grew louder, more excited. The scratching at the walls became more frantic. They knew Mom was listening to them. Tyler, I whispered the charm. Elmer said it would protect against whatever's out there. I pulled the leather pouch from my pocket and placed it around Mom's neck. As soon as it touched her skin, she blinked several times, like she was waking up. Jake, she said, sounding like herself again. What's happening? They're trying to trick you, I explained, like they tried to trick me last night. She clutched the charm, looking scared but more alert. We need to stay together, she said, no matter what we hear or see. The night wore on. The three of us huddled together on the couch. The creatures outside seemed to grow more frustrated as time passed. The scratching turned to pounding, the howls to snarls. Then, around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Are they gone? Tyler whispered after a few minutes. Mom shook her head. They're waiting for something. As if on cue, we heard a new sound. Footsteps on the gravel outside, approaching the RV. Then a familiar voice called out, "Diane? Boys? It's me. Let me in." It was Dad's voice, exactly as I remembered it. Mom gripped my hand tightly. "That's not your father," she whispered. "Diane, please," the voice called again, sounding desperate now. "I'm hurt. I need help. Let me in." Tyler moved toward the door, but Mom grabbed his arm. "It's not him," she said firmly. "Your father would never come back here without calling out a warning first. He knows what's been happening." The voice outside changed, becoming angry. "Let me in, now," it demanded, no longer sounding quite like Dad. Then came the pounding on the door, heavy blows that made the whole RV shake. The door began to bend inward under the force. "The bedroom," Mom said, pushing us toward the back. "Go now." We rushed into the small bedroom and locked the flimsy door behind us. Outside, we heard the main door of the RV finally give way with a crash of breaking metal. Heavy footsteps entered the RV, accompanied by a low growling sound. We could hear them moving around, sniffing the air. "They can smell us," Tyler whispered, his face white with fear. Mom looked around desperately, then pointed to the small window above the bed. "Out, both of you, now." "We're not leaving you," I protested. "I'll be right behind you," she promised, though we all knew she was too weak to climb out. "Please, Jake, I need you to be brave." The bedroom door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Tyler moved quickly, opening the window and helping me climb out first. I dropped to the ground outside and looked up, expecting to see Tyler following. Instead, I saw Mom's face at the window. "Run to the road," she said, her voice calm despite everything. "Don't look back. I love you both so much." "Mom," Tyler cried, trying to pull her toward the window, but she pushed him away. "Go with your brother, keep each other safe." The bedroom door splintered behind her. Mom turned to face whatever was coming through, her body blocking our view. "Go," she screamed. Tyler finally climbed out, dropping down beside me. We both stood frozen for a moment, hearing the terrible sounds from inside the RV, growls, a scream cut short, things breaking. "We have to go," I sobbed, pulling at Tyler's arm. He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and we ran toward the road, leaving behind the only home we had left, and our mother. As we reached the edge of the campground, I made the mistake of looking back. What I saw will haunt me forever. Dark shapes moving around our RV, and in the doorway, a tall figure standing upright like a man, but with the head of a dog, its eyes glowing in the darkness as it watched us run. We ran blindly through the darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks. The dirt road seemed to stretch forever ahead of us. Behind us, the howling started again, excited, triumphant howls that made my blood run cold. "They're coming after us," Tyler gasped, pulling me along faster. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop seeing Mom's face at that window. Her last words kept echoing in my head. "I love you both so much." We reached a fork in the road. One path continued toward the ranger station, the other led deeper into the forest. "Which way?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. Tyler hesitated, then pointed to the forest path. They'll expect us to go to the ranger station. Let's try to lose them in the trees. It seemed like a bad idea to me, but I trusted my brother. We veered onto the narrow trail, moving as quietly as we could now. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting silver light through the branches. After about 10 minutes of walking, Tyler pulled me behind a large tree. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath. In the distance, I could hear them, heavy footsteps and that strange clicking sound, like claws tapping together. They were on the main road, heading toward the ranger station. "They fell for it," Tyler said, relief in his voice. "Come on, let's keep moving." We continued down the forest path, moving faster now. I had no idea where we were going, but anywhere seemed better than Hollow Creek. "What do you think happened to Dad?" I asked, after a while, needing to break the terrible silence. Tyler didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was tight with pain. "I think he's gone, Jake, like Mom." I knew he was right, but hearing it made it real in a way I couldn't bear. I stopped walking, overwhelmed by grief. "We can't stop," Tyler said gently, taking my hand. "We have to keep going." "Where?" I asked. "Where are we going?" "There's gotta be a highway somewhere," he said. "Or another campground with people. Real people." We walked for what felt like hours. The forest path eventually widened into a dirt road again. My legs ached, and my eyes kept closing from exhaustion. Tyler wasn't doing much better, stumbling every few steps. Just as the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn, we saw something ahead, a building of some kind. "Is that the ranger station?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. Tyler squinted. "I don't think so. It looks different." As we got closer, we could see it was an old cabin, weathered and gray in the early morning light. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone was inside. "Should we knock?" I whispered. Tyler nodded, though he looked uncertain. "We need help. Just stay behind me." "Okay." We approached the cabin cautiously. Tyler raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open. Elmer Guthrie stood there, his one eye widening at the sight of us. "You boys made it out," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Quick, get inside, before they catch your scent again." We stumbled into the cabin too, exhausted and shocked to question why the gas station attendant was here in the middle of the forest. The inside of the cabin was small but warm, with a fire burning in the stone fight. The walls were covered with strange symbols, the same ones we'd seen painted on the trees. "Sit," Elmer said, pointing to 2 chairs by the fire. "You look half dead." We sat, and he handed us each a cup of something hot. I sniffed it suspiciously. "Just tea," he said with a crooked smile. "Nothing funny in it." I took a small sip. It tasted bitter but warmed me from the inside. "Our parents," Tyler began, his voice breaking. "I know," Elmer cut him off. "I'm sorry, truly." "What are those things?" I asked. "The ones that look like dogmen." Elmer sighed heavily, sitting down across from us. "They call themselves the Pack. Been in these woods for generations." "Are they werewolves?" Tyler asked, sounding embarrassed even as he said it. Elmer shook his head. "Nothing so simple. They're something older, something that learned to hunt humans by becoming almost human themselves." "But why?" I asked. "Why did they target us?" "They didn't target you specifically," Elmer said. "They hunt families, always have. But they're drawn to secrets. The more secrets a family has, the more they want them." I thought about Mom's cancer, the secret she'd been keeping from us. Had that somehow attracted these creatures? "The sheriff," Tyler said suddenly. "He's one of them, isn't he? He had the same charm you gave Jake." Elmer nodded grimly. "Donovan isn't exactly one of them, but he works with them. Keeps people away from their hunting grounds, delivers fresh victims when the hunting's been poor." "And the Prescotts?" I asked. "Were they real?" "Oh, they were real, all right," Elmer said. "Family of 4 came up here about a week before you. The Pack took them quick. All except the youngest boy. He made it as far as my gas station before Donovan caught him and took him back." I felt sick. Why are you helping us then? Why give me the charm? Ulmer touched his eye patch. I wasn't always like this, used to be a ranger here years ago, had a family of my own. His voice grew distant. The pack took them, took my eye too, when I tried to fight back. Now I try to warn folks when I can, give them a fighting chance. The charm, I said, pulling it from my pocket. What is it? Protection, Ulmer replied. Made from herbs they can't stand and marked with symbols they fear. It confuses them, makes it harder for them to get in your head. Get in our head? Tyler repeated. That's how they hunt. Ulmer explained. They don't just track you through the woods, they get inside your mind, learn your fears, your secrets, then they use those against you. That explained the voices we'd heard, the way Mom thought she was hearing Dad call to her. We need to get out of here, Tyler said, standing up. Get to a town, tell people what's happening. Ulmer laughed bitterly. You think anyone would believe you? Stories about dogmen in the woods? They'd lock you up. Then what do we do? I asked desperately. Ulmer was quiet for a moment. There's a highway about 5 miles east of here. If you can reach it, you might be able to flag down a car, get far away from these woods. Will you take us? Tyler asked. Ulmer shook his head. I can't leave. The pack would know, would come for me. But I can give you directions and more charms for protection. He stood up and went to a cabinet, pulling out 2 more leather pouches like the one he'd given me. As he turned back to us, the door of the cabin burst open. Sheriff Donovan stood there, his gun pointed at Ulmer. That's enough, old man, he said coldly. Behind him, I could see shapes moving in the early morning light, tall figures standing just outside, their outlines not quite human. Run! Ulmer shouted, throwing the charms toward us. Tyler caught them both, grabbing my arm with his other hand. We bolted for the back door that Ulmer had pointed to earlier. Behind us, a gunshot rang out. I looked back just in time to see Ulmer fall, blood spreading across his chest. We burst through the back door into the forest. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows through the trees. We ran as fast as we could, Tyler leading the way, following what he hoped was east based on the rising sun. Don't look back, he kept saying. Just run. But I could hear them behind us, the heavy footsteps, the excited howls. They were enjoying the chase. We came to a small stream and splashed across it, hoping to throw off our scent. On the other side was a steep hill. We scrambled up it, grabbing at roots and rocks to pull ourselves higher. At the top, Tyler stopped suddenly. The RV, he said, pointing ahead. There, in a small clearing, was our RV. Somehow we'd circled back to the campground. No, I moaned, we're going the wrong way. Wait, Tyler said, his face lighting up with a desperate idea. Maybe we can use it. It's broken, I reminded him. The brake lines, the fuel. We don't need to go far, he said. Just far enough to reach the highway, and going downhill, we won't need much gas. It was a crazy plan, but we didn't have many options. We ran to the RV, trying not to look at the dark stains on the ground around it. The door was hanging open, the inside trashed. I didn't let myself look too closely at anything, as Tyler jumped into the driver's seat. Do you even know how to drive? I asked, climbing in beside him. I've watched Dad enough times, he said, searching for the keys. How hard can it be? He found the keys under the seat and jammed them into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Yes, Tyler shouted, grabbing the wheel. Now we just need to... A massive shape landed on the hood of the RV with a crash. One of the dogmen, its yellow eyes staring at us through the windshield. Its mouth opened in what looked almost like a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Tyler slammed the RV into reverse, then hit the gas. The creature lost its balance as we shot backward, falling off the hood. Hold on, Tyler yelled, shifting gears again. The RV lurched forward, picking up speed as we headed down the sloping road. Behind us, howls of rage filled the air. We're doing it, I cried, hope surging through me. We're getting away. But then I saw Tyler's face fall as he pumped the brake pedal. No brakes, he said tensely. And we're going too fast. The RV was racing down the mountain road now, bouncing violently over every bump. Trees flashed by on either side. Tyler gripped the wheel, trying desperately to keep us on the road. "There," I shouted, pointing ahead. "I can see the highway." In the distance, through a gap in the trees, I could make out a stretch of paved road, the highway Elmer had told us about. Tyler grinned fiercely. "We're going to make it, Jake." That's when we heard it, a heavy thump on the roof of the RV. Then another, and another. "There on the roof," I whispered, looking up in horror. Claws began to tear through the metal above us, peeling it back like the lid of a can. A dark shape dropped into the RV behind us. One of the dogmen, hunched over in the confined space, but still terrifyingly large. Tyler looked at me, and I saw the decision in his eyes before he said it. "Jump," he ordered. "When I say so, roll when you hit the ground." "What? No," I cried. "I'm not leaving you. I'll be right behind you," he promised, though we both knew it was a lie. "Someone has to keep driving long enough for you to get away." The creature behind us snarled, moving closer. I could smell its hot, rotten breath. "Now," Tyler shouted, reaching across me to fling open my door. I hesitated for just a second, looking at my brother. My brave, stubborn brother, who was sacrificing himself for me. "I love you," I said, then jumped. The ground hit me hard, knocking the breath from my lungs. I rolled down a small embankment, rocks and sticks scraping my skin. When I finally stopped rolling, I looked up just in time to see the RV careen around a bend in the road, the roof crawling with dark shapes. There was a terrible crash, then silence. "Tyler," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to run to him, to see if by some miracle he'd survived. But I knew what would happen if I did. The pack would be waiting. Instead, I pulled myself to my feet and stumbled toward the highway, clutching the charm Tyler had given me. It took everything I had not to look back. When I reached the highway, the sun was fully up. I stood by the side of the road, thumb out, praying for a car to come by. After what seemed like forever, a truck slowed down and stopped. "You okay, kid?" the driver asked, looking concerned. "You're bleeding." I opened my mouth to tell him everything about the pack, about my family, about Hollow Creek, but I knew how it would sound. Instead, I just said, "I need help." "My family, there was an accident." He let me in and drove me to the nearest town, where the police took my statement. I told them a version of the truth, that we'd been camping, that our RV had crashed, that my family hadn't made it. I left out the dogmen, the sheriff, all the impossible parts. They found the crashed RV and what was left of Tyler inside it. They found the remains of my parents at the campground. The official report blamed animal attacks and a tragic accident. Sheriff Donovan was never found for questioning. The ranger station had no record of us ever checking in. Hollow Creek Campground was officially closed due to environmental concerns. I went to live with my aunt in another state. I tried to forget, tried to move on, but the nightmares never stopped. 20 years later, I went back, not alone. I brought researchers, people who studied cryptids and unexplained phenomena, people who might believe me. We found Hollow Creek overgrown, the campground long abandoned, but the symbols were still there on the trees, faded but visible. In an old government archive, we discovered files about experiments conducted in the 1950s, attempts to create super soldiers using chemical compounds that altered DNA. The test site, a military facility deep in the Ozark Mountains, not far from Hollow Creek, and the charms. They contained a compound that counteracted the chemicals, temporarily reverting the creatures to a more human state of mind. Sheriff Donovan hadn't been controlling them. He'd been one of them, using the charm to maintain his human appearance. The pack is still out there. I can feel them sometimes, even now, at the edges of my dreams, waiting, watching, hunting families with secrets. If you're planning a camping trip, check your destination carefully, and if you stop at a gas station and meet a one-eyed man who offers you a charm, take it. And whatever you do, stay away from Hollow Creek. My name is Frank Dawson. I'm 43 years old, and I've seen things no man should ever have to see. Vietnam took pieces of me I'll never get back. Not just the scars on my body, but the ones nobody can see. The ones that wake me up screaming at 3 a.m., soaked in sweat, thinking I'm back in the jungle with blood on my hands. 3 months ago, Linda finally had enough. Can't blame her. Living with someone who jumps at car backfires and spends half the night pacing isn't exactly the marriage she signed up for. The divorce papers came through last week. My daughter Jenny, she's 16 now, hasn't spoken to me in months. Says I scare her. That cuts deeper than any shrapnel ever could. The VA doctor gave me these little blue pills. They help sometimes, but they make everything foggy. I'd rather feel the pain than feel nothing at all. That's why I decided to get away. Really away. Somewhere I could face my demons without scaring anyone else. I found this place called Pinewood Campground in a dusty travel guide at the library, way up in Olympic National Forest, Washington. The book was old, but it talked about dense forests and quiet lakes. Perfect. I didn't care that newer maps showed it as closed. Better that way, no families with laughing kids to look at me like I'm broken. My Winnebago Brave isn't much, but she's home now. Got her cheap last year, 1974 model with a few dents and a radio that works when it feels like it. Plastered the back with Vietnam vet stickers, maybe so people would understand if I act strange, or maybe just to remind myself that what happened over there was real. The drive took 3 days. By the time I reached Washington, the mountains were wrapped in fog so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The turnoff to Pinewood was marked with a faded wooden sign, half covered in moss. A metal gate blocked the road with a big CLO'd sign hanging from a chain. I parked, walked around it, and found the lock had rusted through years ago, easy enough to drive around. The campground road hadn't been maintained in years. Potholes everywhere, tree branches scraping the sides of my RV, but I kept going until the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing by a lake. The water was so still it looked like black glass, not even a ripple. Strange for a mountain lake. I parked facing the water and sat there for a while, engine off, just listening to the silence. Real silence, not the kind you get in the suburbs where there's always a distant car or a neighbor's TV. This was complete. Almost too complete. That first night I slept better than I had in months. No nightmares, just darkness. The next morning I drove into the nearest town for supplies, just a tiny place called Millerville with one main street. The gas station doubled as the only grocery store. That's where I met Walter Gunderson, old guy with hands so gnarled they look like tree roots. Must have been in his 70s. "You staying up at Pinewood?" he asked while ringing up my canned beans and whiskey. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He nodded at my RV outside. "Nobody goes up that way anymore. Place has been closed since '72. "Yeah, I like the privacy," I said. Walter's eyes narrowed. "You military?" I nodded. "Thought so." Got that look. He leaned closer. "Listen, son, that place ain't right. They closed it for a reason. 17 people gone missing up there since the '50s. Last ones were a family of 4 in '72. I'd heard this kind of talk before. Small towns always have their ghost stories. "I can handle myself," I told him. Walter shrugged. "Hear funeral. But if you start hearing things up there, voices that ain't there, you get in this rig of yours and drive away. Don't look back." I thanked him for the advice, paid for my supplies, and left. Crazy old man trying to scare the outsider, I figured. But as I drove back up the mountain, the fog closing in around me, his words kept playing in my head. Voices that ain't there. If only I'd listened. I woke up the next morning feeling strange. Something was off, but I couldn't place it at first. The sun was filtering through the pine trees, casting long shadows across my RV. Then I realized what was wrong. My Winnebago wasn't where I'd parked it. I know that sounds crazy. I'm the only one here with keys, and they were right on the little table next to my bunk all night. But somehow, my RV was now parked about 20 feet closer to the lake than where I'd left it. The tire tracks in the dirt proved it. Must have forgotten to set the parking brake, I muttered to myself, even though I knew I hadn't. 20 years of driving, and I'd never once forgotten. I made some instant coffee and sat on my fold-out chair, watching the still lake. Not even a bird landed on its surface. Weird. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like someone whispering through static, coming from the trees behind me. It was so faint I thought it might be the wind at first, but there wasn't any breeze. I walked toward the sound, pushing through some low branches. Nothing there. But as I turned to head back, I froze. The whispers changed, becoming clearer. It sounded exactly like the radio chatter we used to hear in Vietnam. Same crackle, same rhythm of voices calling coordinates and requesting medevac. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the massive forest. The whispering stopped instantly. I spent the rest of the day exploring the campground, trying to convince myself I was just hearing things. The place was bigger than I expected. About 20 campsites spread around the lake, plus a small ranger station near the entrance. Most of the picnic tables were rotting away, and nature was reclaiming the fire pits. The ranger station door was hanging off its hinges. Inside, it smelled like mold and animal droppings. Old papers were scattered everywhere, soaked and dried so many times they were stiff as cardboard. But on one wall, protected by glass in a frame, were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, but still readable. Fourth disappearance at Pinewood stumps. Authorities raid one from 1958. Search for missing hikers enters second week, said another from 1963. The most recent was from 1972. Campground closed after family vanishes. 17 people, just like Walter had said, all gone without a trace. I headed back to my RV as the sun was setting, feeling eyes on my back the whole way. That night I had my first real drink in months. Just needed something to steady my nerves. Big mistake. Around midnight, I woke up to voices outside my window, not whispers this time, but clear as day. Men talking, laughing. Medic. "Hey doc, pass that canteen." I knew that voice. It belonged to Private Cooper, a kid from Alabama who'd bled out under my hands after stepping on a mine in '68. "Doc Dawson, you gonna sleep all day? We got a patrol in 10. That was Sergeant Reeves, the man who'd saved my life twice before taking a bullet to the throat in a village whose name I can't even pronounce. I'd held pressure on his wound for 20 minutes while he drowned in his own blood. I sat up, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "You're not real," I whispered. The voices went quiet for a moment. Then right outside my window, Sergeant Reeves spoke again. "We're as real as you are, Doc. Come outside. We've been waiting for you." I pulled the blanket over my head like a scared kid. The voices continued all night, sometimes fading, sometimes so close it felt like they were sitting right next to me. My fallen platoon, men I'd failed to save, having a reunion right outside my RV. When morning finally came, I stumbled outside, exhausted and shaking. The clearing was empty. No footprints in the dirt except my own. My pill bottle was sitting on the picnic table. Empty. I always kept count. Should have been 12 pills left. I tore apart the RV looking for them, but they were gone. Without my meds, the line between what was real and what was in my head would start to blur. I needed to get back to town, but when I tried to start the Winnebago, the engine just clicked. Dead battery. I was stuck here with whatever was in these woods. That afternoon, I hiked back to the ranger station, hoping to find a radio or something I could use to call for help. The voices followed me, staying just out of sight among the trees. "Don't bother, Doc," Cooper's voice called. "No one's coming for us. Just like in the jungle, remember?" I ignored them, pushing through the forest. That's when I noticed the trees. Some of them had strange symbols carved into their trunks, not normal trail markers or initials. These were complex patterns, spirals, and jagged lines that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. When I got to the ranger station, the door was closed and locked. I'm sure it had been open the day before, hanging off its hinges. I broke a window to get in. The newspaper clippings were gone. The whole place was clean. No scattered papers, no animal droppings, just empty desks and a layer of dust. And on the wall where the clippings had been, someone had carved the same symbols I'd seen on the trees. I ran all the way back to my RV. the voices laughing behind me the whole way. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those strange symbols. I kept the lights on in my RV and sat at the small table, a kitchen knife in front of me. Not that it would help against voices. Around 3 a.m. I felt something itch on my arm. When I rolled up my sleeve, my blood turned cold. There on my forearm was one of those symbols, like someone had scratched it into my skin while I wasn't looking. But I'd been awake the whole time. Hadn't I? You're doing it to yourself, Frank, Sergeant Reeves' voice said from the darkness outside. Just like you did to us. Left us to die. That's not true, I whispered. I tried to save you, all of you. Try harder. Another voice joined in. This one belonged to Martinez, who died on a helicopter that never reached the hospital. I covered my ears, but the voices just got louder. They knew details about Vietnam that no one else could know. Things I'd never told anyone, not even Linda. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the sun finally rose, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my arm again. The symbol was still there, but now it looked more like a burn than a scratch. I needed to get out of here. I tried the RV engine again, and this time it started right up. Relief washed over me as I backed away from the lake. But as I reached the campground entrance, a figure stepped out onto the road. A man in a forest ranger uniform stood there, hand raised for me to stop. I hit the brakes. He walked over to my window and I rolled it down. "Sir, this area is closed to the public," he said. His name tag read, T. Holt. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm leaving now," I told him. Ranger Holt looked at me with tired eyes. "You've been hearing them, haven't you? The voices?" My mouth went dry. "How did you?" "It happens to everyone who stays too long, especially those with," he paused, looking at my veteran bumper stickers, "especially those with pain it can use." "What can use?" I asked. Ranger Holt glanced nervously at the forest. "The hungry one. It lives in these woods. Has for centuries. The natives never camped here. They knew better." I should have thought he was crazy, but after what I'd experienced, I was ready to believe anything. "What does it want?" I asked. "It feeds on suffering before it feeds on flesh," he said quietly. "The more pain you carry, the tastier you are, and you, sir, are carrying a lot of pain." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Keep this with you. It might help." I took it. Inside was what looked like dried herbs and small bones. "Get out while you can," Ranger Holt said, stepping back from my RV. "I've stayed too long myself. Just doing one last patrol." He tipped his hat and walked into the trees. I should have left right then, but something made me turn the RV around and head back to the lake. It was like I wasn't in control anymore. That night was the worst yet. I woke up around midnight to find my RV had changed. The walls looked like canvas, the seats replaced with military cots. My Winnebago had somehow transformed into a medical tent from Vietnam. The radio turned on by itself, playing static before a voice came through, a voice I recognized as the commander who'd sent us on that final deadly mission. "Charlie's moving north through Sector 7. All units respond." I got up, shaking, and turned it off. The moment I did, the radio across the RV turned on instead. Then the small TV I never use flickered to life, showing only static. "Make it stop," I begged to no one. "You can make it stop, Doc," Sergeant Reeves said, his voice now coming from inside the RV. "Just like you could have saved me." I turned around slowly. No one was there, but the air had gotten so cold I could see my breath. Something moved in the corner of my eye, a shadow passing across the wall. When I looked directly at it, it was gone. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the driver's seat, the leather pouch Ranger Holt gave me clutched in my hand. It didn't seem to help. As dawn broke, the RV slowly returned to normal. The cots became seats again, the canvas walls turned back to paneling, but the cold remained. I decided to look for Ranger Holt. Maybe he knew more about how to fight this thing. I followed the path he'd taken into the forest, calling his name. About a mile in, I found a small cabin I hadn't noticed before. The door was ajar. Inside, it was just one room with a bed, a desk, and a wood stove. On the desk was a journal, open to a page dated October 1968. The handwriting was messy, desperate. "It's using my memories against me, shows me Da Nang every night now. The voices are constant. I know what it wants. It wants me to relive the worst day of my life over and over until I can't take it anymore. Then it will come for me. I've seen it watching from the trees, tall, thin, hungry." The journal was signed, Corporal James Wilson, USMC, another veteran, just like me. I flipped through the journal, reading entries that mirrored my own experiences. The voices, the RV moving, the symbols. The final entry simply read, "It's here." As I put the journal down, I noticed something scratched into the desk. "It wears their faces." I backed out of the cabin, my heart racing. That's when I saw it. A fresh set of boot prints in the mud outside, leading deeper into the forest. Ranger Holt's, maybe. I followed them, not sure why. They led to a small clearing, where the prints suddenly stopped. In their place was a much larger print, like a deer's hoof, but huge. And beside it, Ranger Holt's hat, covered in blood. I ran back to my RV, clutching Ranger Holt's bloody hat. My mind was racing. Whatever was in these woods had taken him, just like it had taken the others before. And now it was after me. I locked myself inside the Winnebago for all the good that would do. If this thing could change my RV into a Vietnam medical tent, locks probably wouldn't stop it. As the sun began to set, the forest grew unnaturally dark. The trees seemed to lean in toward my RV, their shadows stretching like fingers across the ground. I tried the engine again. Dead. Of course, the radio clicked on by itself, playing a song Linda and I had danced to at our wedding. Then it changed to Jenny's favorite lullaby from when she was little. This thing wasn't just reading my war memories. It was digging through everything that mattered to me. "Stop it," I said, my voice shaking. "Just show yourself." The radio went silent. Then slowly the inside of my RV began to change again. But this time it wasn't turning into a medical tent. The walls melted away, replaced by jungle. Hot, humid air filled my lungs. The smell of mud and gunpowder surrounded me. I was back in Vietnam, not just remembering it, I was there. Rain poured down through the trees. I looked down at myself. I was wearing my medic uniform, covered in mud and blood that wasn't mine. My medical bag hung heavy at my side. "Doc, over here. We need you." I turned to see Sergeant Reeves waving me over to where a soldier lay on the ground, clutching his stomach. Blood poured between his fingers. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it felt real. The rain on my skin, the weight of my pack, the squelch of mud under my boots as I automatically moved toward the wounded man. It was Private Jenkins. Just like that day in '69, the day everything went wrong. "You can save him this time, Doc," Sergeant Reeves said, his eyes pleading. "You know what's coming. You can change it." I knelt beside Jenkins, opening my medical bag with shaking hands. I knew what was coming. In about 30 seconds, a sniper would put a bullet through Reeves' throat. I'd leave Jenkins to try to save Reeves, and both men would die. "It's not real," I told myself, even as I pressed bandages against Jenkins' wound. "This is the thing in the woods. It's showing me this to feed on my guilt." But knowing didn't make it any less real. I could feel Jenkins' blood, hot and slick on my hands. I could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors and gunfire. I looked up at Reeves, standing guard a few feet away. In the real memory, I never saw the sniper's bullet hit him. I just heard him fall. "Get down," I screamed. Reeves looked at me, confused. Then his eyes went wide as blood erupted from his throat. He fell backward, hands clutching at his neck. Just like before, I abandoned Jenkins and crawled to Reeves. Blood pulsed between his fingers with each heartbeat. His eyes locked onto mine, full of fear. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pressing my hands over his. "I'm so sorry, John." Reeves tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound came out. His eyes stayed fixed on mine as the life drained out of them. Then something changed. Reeves' face began to shift, the skin becoming gray and stretched. His eyes sank deeper into his skull, turning black and empty. His mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "You let us die," he said, but it wasn't Reeves' voice anymore. It was something ancient and hungry. "Your guilt is delicious." I scrambled backward, falling into the mud. The jungle around me flickered, briefly showing the inside of my RV before returning to Vietnam. "You're not real," I shouted. "None of this is real." The thing wearing Reeves' face smiled. "Pain is always real, Frank, and yours is exquisite." It began to crawl toward me, its movements jerky and wrong like a spider pretending to be human. I backed away until I hit a tree. The creature's face kept changing, flashing between Reeves, Jenkins, and other men from my platoon. Then suddenly, everything vanished. I was back in my RV, sitting on the floor, soaked in sweat. Outside, night had fallen completely. My hands were covered in dirt, like I'd been digging. But I hadn't left the RV, had I? I looked out the window and saw a trail of footprints, my footprints, leading from the RV into the forest. And clutched in my hand was a small bone that hadn't been there before. I needed to know what was happening to me. Following the footprints, I took a flashlight and walked into the woods. The trail led up a hill to a place where the trees thinned out. There, in the side of the hill, was a cave opening I hadn't noticed before. My footprints led straight inside. The smell hit me first, rot and decay. I should have turned back, but I had to know. I shined my flashlight into the darkness. The cave floor was littered with bones. Some old and gray, others still had bits of flesh clinging to them. And propped against the far wall was a body, fresh, still wearing a forest ranger uniform. Ranger Holt stared back at me with empty eye sockets. His chest had been torn open. Ribs splayed outward like someone had opened him from the inside. Next to him lay other, older remains. One still wore dog tags around neck bones. I picked them up with trembling fingers. Corporal James Wilson, USMC, the man who wrote the journal. As I backed out of the cave, my flashlight caught something on the wall, hundreds of those strange symbols, carved into the stone. And in the center, a crude drawing of a tall, skeletal figure with antlers. The Wendigo. The hungry one. I ran back to my RV, my mind made up. I wasn't going to be this thing's next meal. I wasn't going to let it feed on my pain anymore. It was time to fight back. Back in my RV, I dumped everything out of my drawers and cabinets. I needed weapons, anything I could use. I found my old lighter, some rags, and a can of gasoline I kept for emergencies. I also grabbed my hunting knife and the flare gun from my emergency kit. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. This thing, this Wendigo, fed on pain and guilt before it took your body. It had been playing with me, making me relive my worst memories, getting stronger with each flashback. But I understood something now. If it wanted my pain, I could use that as bait. I sat at the small table and wrote a letter to Jenny, just in case I didn't make it. I told her everything I should have said years ago, how proud I was of her, how sorry I was for being broken after the war, how none of it was her fault. I sealed it in an envelope and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I got to work. I soaked the rags in gasoline and stuffed them into empty beer bottles. Old-school Molotov cocktails, just like we used to make in Nam. I loaded the flare gun and strapped the knife to my belt. Night had fallen completely now. The forest outside was silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing, just waiting darkness. "I know what you are," I called out, standing in the doorway of my RV. "I know what you want." No response, but the air grew colder, my breath fogging in front of me. "You want my pain, my guilt? Come and get it, Hull. I'm done running." I stepped outside, a bottle in one hand, lighter in the other. The moon was hidden behind clouds, leaving only my flashlight to cut through the darkness. Something moved between the trees, just a shadow at first, then more solid. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and thin as a skeleton. As it stepped into the clearing, I finally saw it clearly. The Wendigo looked almost human, but wrong in every way. Its skin was stretched tight over bones, gray and translucent. Through its chest, I could see faces pressed against the inside of its skin, Ranger Holt, Corporal Wilson, and others I didn't recognize. Trapped souls. Its head was crowned with antlers that scraped the low branches of the pines, but its eyes, those were the worst part. Black and empty, yet somehow hungry. Looking into them was like staring into a hole that could never be filled. "Frank Dawson," it said, using Sergeant Reeves' voice, the medic who couldn't save anyone. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. That's right. I failed them. I've carried that guilt for years. You've been feeding on it since I got here. The Wendigo tilted its head, curious. Your pain is the sweetest I've tasted in decades. So much guilt, so much self-hatred. Well, dinner's over, I said, lighting the rag in the bottle. The creature laughed, a sound like branches breaking in winter. You cannot harm me with fire, soldier. I am ancient. I have consumed warriors far stronger than you. Maybe, I said, but I bet all that pain you've been eating is flammable. I threw the bottle, but not at the Wendigo. I threw it at the RV behind me. The bottle smashed against the side, flames erupting instantly. My home for the past year caught fire with a whoosh. The Wendigo hissed, taking a step back. What are you doing? Burning it all down, I said, lighting another bottle. All the memories, all the guilt, all the pain you've been feeding on. I threw the second bottle at the trees near the creature. They caught fire easily, dry from weeks without rain. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound that made my ears ring. You need my pain? I shouted over the growing fire. Then take it all. I closed my eyes and did the hardest thing I've ever done. I let myself remember everything. Every man I couldn't save. Every nightmare. Every moment I'd pushed away Jenny when she needed her father. I didn't fight the memories this time. I let them come. When I opened my eyes, the Wendigo was right in front of me. Its bony hand reached for my chest. Yes, it whispered. Give it to me. I pulled the flare gun from my belt and pressed it against my own chest, right where its hand was reaching. Just take it, I said, and pulled the trigger. The flare exploded between us, catching my jacket on fire. The Wendigo screamed as the flame spread to its arm, then its chest. The faces trapped inside its skin began to wail, their mouths opening in silent screams. I was burning too, but I didn't feel the pain. I grabbed the creature with flaming arms, holding it close as we both burned. The fire spread through the clearing, catching the dry pine needles on the ground. The Wendigo thrashed and clawed at me, but I wouldn't let go. As the flames consumed us both, I saw the faces in its chest begin to fade, one by one, released. I'm sorry, Jenny, I whispered as the world turned to fire and smoke. The newspaper called it a forest fire, started by a careless camper in a closed campground. They found the remains of my Wendigo, but my body was never recovered. Just another disappearance at Pinewood, but I didn't disappear. Not really. I'm still here in these woods. I can feel the Wendigo too, weakened but not destroyed. We're bound together now, locked in an endless battle among the whispering pines. Sometimes I can reach out beyond the forest, small things, moving a pencil, turning on a radio, writing a letter. That's how I contacted Jenny. 5 years after the fire, she received a letter in my handwriting. It led her to Pinewood, to the same clearing where my RV once stood. I watch her from the trees as she reads my final letter. I want to warn her to leave this place, but the Wendigo wants her to stay. It's hungry again, and as she looks up, peering into the dark forest, I realize with horror that she has my eyes, my pain, my guilt, the perfect feast. The whispering begins.